Here we are, part 3 of the music of Dead Space. I think when we last left, I was up to my eyeballs in options and really trying to figure out what I needed to do. The only thing that I knew was how much money I had. I don't remember how much it was, or I would tell you. It was some good medium amount of money where I could have an orchestra for a couple of days. Basically, I think I had a week of recording time, and I split that in 2. So 2 or 2.5 days with the orchestra. But I needed to be able to record individual sections. So there was a lot of a day of strings, and then a day of brass, and then a morning of woodwinds and an afternoon of percussion. And even though it was 3 days, technically it was only about a day and a half of budget because the whole band wasn't sitting in the room at the same time. That was a big part of it. How long do I need to have the orchestra on the stage? It all depended. How much music could I record each hour? 3 to 5 minutes is kind of the average. Normally, I get more like 5 to 7 when I'm recording music, but when I'm recording effects like this, is that the same thing? I got to do more than 5 minutes of effects an hour, right? I need like 30 minutes of effects an hour. And as it turned out, I usually ended up getting about 40 minutes of effects an hour because the beauty of aleatoric music is there are no wrong notes. What are they going to do? Come in a little early? Great! They're going to play the wrong note? Perfect! They're going to screech or scratch or flub or great! The worse it sounded, the better. It was like there were no rules. The only rules were we were breaking all of the rules. The biggest thing that I struggled with, honestly, were like the clusters and the brass that I showed you in the last episode. How many different versions of that do I need before I go to another technique that's not just a big fat cluster? Do I do a lot of variations so I've got good material? Because the more variations of that I do, then I don't have enough time to do other things. It was all about balancing that seesaw. But the nice thing, to use the brass clusters as an example, since I had them separate, I think I did 6 clusters. I had 6 horn clusters, 6 trombone clusters, and 6 low brass clusters. And I could exchange those and interchange them however I wanted to. So you play a different horn cluster over the same trombone cluster, it sounds like a different cluster. So I used that a lot to really play into the like 6 times 6 times 6 sort of thing for variation, especially with the strings and the brass. I'm going through my document here because a lot of this is stuff we've already talked about. Multiple recording sessions, 2 months of pre-production. So I spent literally 2 months going to this amazing music library in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I made probably at least 2 or 3 trips each week and would stay for 3 or 4 hours and photocopied scores. Because it was all about learning how to get the aleatoric music on the page, which Paul was helping me with, but just in my brain first. I felt like I really needed to soak it up and learn how it sounded so that I didn't record, 10 different things that all kind of sounded the same. I didn't know a whole lot about that kind of music. Now, my music degree from undergrad was very 20th century. My music professor was very much a 20th century music professor, but he was more like John Cage 20th century. Music as an abstract idea as opposed to using real instruments to perform notes of music that are written on a page. One of the things that we did serial music in our MIDI ensemble, electronic music ensemble lab class band thing, and we had a concert and we were playing triggers on cereal boxes around the concert hall, triggering MIDI stuff up on front. That was serial music because it was cereal boxes. An organ piece where you walk up and stick your pencil in the organ and walk off stage and just let middle C play, and that's the last piece of the concert, and everybody's like, is that it? Music as an abstract idea more than performable scores. So it didn't help me too much. I needed more scores. I needed more data. I needed to know what the building blocks were so that I could kind of deconstruct it and then rebuild it how the game needed it to be done. And it was like, okay, the recording session is in 10 weeks. I'm doing this full time, basically. I need to go. I need to treat the orchestra like a synthesizer almost and come up with the sine waves and all the oscillators and figure out the best way to get everything working. Because there's no demos. I couldn't preview anything for the audio director. It was literally just like, well, I have an idea. Maybe it would be cool if they did something really quiet, pizzicato on their strings, and, you know, it sounded like rats, like in a famous classical piece. Okay, well, what do I get him to pizzicato the bottom string, or have him do all the strings, or at the bottom of the register, or up high, or maybe I do each string and the low and the high register at 2 dynamics, and everything just multiplies out in terms of time. So I needed to organize it and produce it in a way that I got the best amount of material. And I'm not showing you anything yet because I want you to be in the same headspace as I was when I was trying to figure this out, which was basically just, well, I'm going to be fired soon. I literally didn't know what I was doing, except going to the library and photocopying scores. And I'm sure this probably looks familiar. This is like an example of one of the pages you saw before. This is a Penderecki score. So I bought the recordings and I photocopied the scores, which you can't really buy anywhere, and went through and just made notes and saw what it looked like and sounded like when something like this was being performed. It's very, you know, heart monitor looking. I'm assuming those are violas because of the staff. And they're probably just like playing random things. They just follow the squiggles. I couldn't do squiggles. It needed to have more musical interpretation to it. So I've got all these scores that I used and organized and just did sketches of everything. I mean, none of it is revolutionary because you've already seen things. There's some of Black Angels, which is a great George Crumb piece. Mostly it was Penderecki that I leaned on. And basically I ended up doing sketches that I would send to Paul, which this is the Dead Space recordings, November 29th, 2006. And in the back, I've got the original sketches that are literally the penciled versions of what I did. So I've got things like, for woodwinds, it just shows a bunch of 16th notes and says ad-lib quasi-gliss for 15 seconds. And then it goes to a block for 30 seconds. And then for 15 seconds, there's another block and it says non-diatonic climb to highest pitch. And then 30 seconds at the highest pitch. These were very Penderecki looking kinds of things. Or for brass, on the next page, next staff, triple tongue as fast as possible with just a bunch of random pitches with a squiggly line that says 15 seconds. Or trumpets. It's this sort of thing. That was what I sketched out. That was what I sent to Paul. And it was just kind of like, let's just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what happens. So I've got that page. And then I've got those 2 pages. Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3. And then that was layer 4 or something like that. But what I actually ended up doing, I lied. That's not what I sent to Paul. What I sent to Paul was a much more organized kind of breakdown of everything. So let me see if I can find... Here we go. So this was the top line. This is under Creature Encounters, Woodwinds, because we're recording different kinds of things like creature encounters and safety zones and things like that. So this is the same thing that we just had, except I have a note that says all winds recorded high and low, 30 seconds each. Make this 16 4/4 bars at 120 BPM if it's more straightforward. It's the exact same thing that you saw on the first line, except I've kind of clipped it out, pasted it in here, and given it a number. So we could always refer to it as number 31. And then this was the second half of that same column, number 32, wind clusters. So he got a little more of an organized sort of thing. And this is page, how many pages total? 7 pages. So this is all woodwind stuff. And these are strings and brass, chaos for strings. So a lot of the string sounds were things like high cluster sulpant with slow bends, and it just shows an X. That's all you need to say. They're like, oh, okay, so I'm playing sulpanticello and I'm doing slow bends and it just says cluster. Now, Paul may have spelled it out a little differently, and we'll look at it, some of the scores that Paul did, but this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, just this right here is like 8 different effects. And I'm sorry it's not perfectly in focus, but that was the general idea, is I'd get layers of dynamics and everything would be separate and by itself, and I could control it after the fact. The only real question was how to get the material to put into Kontakt efficiently. So a lot of it, like I said, was creature encounters, which is basically combat music, scary music, and then ambient music, which we did mostly, I think, the main theme, which was one of the creepy files from the first episode of Dead Space that I was talking about. We had a layer 4 for the main theme, which was like a lot scarier. And we did separate ensembles. So I did woodwinds and brass and percussions and strings all separately. And this was all done in Seattle at the Bastille. And literally, we broke like Seattle. We were recording, I was recording some crazy free-form aleatoric like jagan, dagan, dagan, dagan. They were just going like chugging away, and I'd start slow and quiet and just got faster over about 60 seconds, and it kept getting louder and louder and faster, and then all the power went out. And it was at night, so it got dark, and everyone laughed, and there was this huge snowstorm that shut the airport down the next day. It was miserable getting out. But if I look, I think somewhere around here I've got some sounds. So here's some examples of the stuff that we recorded. And I'm just going to play them and see if I remember what they actually sound like. Anyone who's played Dead Space probably recognizes that sound. It's just a unison bend. Unison meaning that they're timing. It's like, it's probably 120, and they're going up and down by a half step. This says unison bend sulpant, so it must be strings. Very, very quiet, but it is strings. This one's called Speeding Bullet, which literally was some 16th notes that I wrote, or 32nd notes I wrote, like, 8 of them. Just like if you banged on a keyboard, intentionally random notes, and just said, play these as fast as you can. Slow and quiet and loud, as fast as you can. So this is Speeding Bullet. So they're just... I really like this one. It's called Bugs. Bugs. I'm sure I can find that here, because I've got everything in the score. Woodwind, strings, and then brass. Oh, see, I need to make sure that we had 2 sections, 2 sessions, and Bugs, I think, was in the second session a year later. This is the cue that I was conducting in real time that shut down the power. just X note heads gradually climb to highest note. Yeah, let's see here. Now the difference, the interesting thing is I did, I think, high strings and low strings on this first session in Seattle, and high woodwinds and low woodwinds, and high brass and low brass. So we've got this kind of little booklet. And then at the second session, I did first violins, second violins, viola, cello, bass. Like I got it really, really separate. Like you saw in the previous score, French horns and then trombones and then bass trombones. This is the second session, which is a lot thicker and a lot crazier. So let me see if I can find the bugs. Cluster swells, scratches. See, I think I called it bugs afterwards. It doesn't line up with what was on the score itself. The score says things like slow glissandi and screaming high stuff, and it's probably, who knows. I was hoping I could show you specifically what it was. I'm not meaning to tease, I promise. But let's see what else we have. This is just called Collegno contrabass. It's a contrabass Collegno. Wavering horns. Oh, I see. It's piano instead of forte. Horns muted cluster swell. That is a muted cluster swell. This is just low mean brass. That's some low mean brass. Random cluster pulsing. Probably one of my favorite sounds from the Skywalker session. I remember that very well. Literally, we had all the strings on the stage, and we recorded like first violin, second violin, viola, cello, bass. But sometimes I would get them all together. I think that might have been just the violins, but the direction was play a random note quietly and then follow me for dynamics. So 20, I think we did violas as well. So violins and violas, you've got like 35 maybe string players, and they're all playing a random note. You get this like 35 note chord. It's just amazing and sounds like that. And you do 3 or 4 takes of it, and it's different every single time. And it just sounded so beautiful. We ended up using that for the pensive moments, I think it was called. So that's enough for now. Next time we're going to get into the actual layers of music and how I put it all together.